Justin Trudeau is done. He has announced his intention to leave his post.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
He's doing this as every poll has long suggested he would be eviscerated in the next election. The majority of his own MPs have turned on him, including his second in command. And the incoming US president has made him the butt of a joke over and over again.
Trump has been making this joke that Canada should be the 51st state and that Justin Trudeau could be the governor.
Let it become a state.
But Trudeau is resigning in a very particular way, a way in which he retains as much power and influence as possible until he finally leaves. And I'm going to explain how this works. The first thing I think is worth understanding is that while Trudeau may have had no choice but to announce his resignation, he's the one setting the terms. And I'll explain what I mean. One by one, over the Christmas break, regional Liberal caucuses in Ontario, the Atlantic provinces, and Quebec sent a strong signal to party leadership saying a majority of our MPs, of Liberals, want Trudeau out. And I want to underline how big a deal this was, how strong the tide has become against Trudeau from within his own team. Right now, the Liberals hold 153 seats in the House of Commons, and the leadership of those caucuses that have openly revolted represent the overwhelming bulk, 86% of all Liberal MPs. So Trudeau has finally come to the conclusion, I've got to go, but not yet. Listen again to the resignation, but specifically the asterisk at the end.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
Trudeau could have chosen to step down immediately and appoint someone else from within the party to take the reins. But what he's doing instead is kicking off a leadership race and staying on as leader and prime minister until his successor is chosen. But it's more complicated than that, because the only way his party survives long enough to hold a leadership race, because this typically takes months, is for him to put Parliament in stasis.
Prorogation.
Prorogue Parliament.
Prorogation.
Well, Justin Trudeau's argument for why it was necessary to prorogue Parliament was that Parliament is dysfunctional. But if we look at the bigger picture here, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals were likely to face a non-confidence motion.
They were trying to get around the fact that the three opposition parties could gang up on them when the House of Commons came back. They would have been into an election campaign without a leader.
So a lot of the pressure and what makes the situation so unprecedented comes from the fact that not long after the NDP ripped up its supply and confidence deal with the Liberals, which propped its minority government up for years, every major party has explicitly stated they would bring down the government and force a snap election as soon as possible.
Leader Yves-François Blanchet says time is up.
We haven't got what we wanted.
Now he says he'll work to bring the government down.
Tonight, the pressure is growing for the Prime Minister with that promise from the NDP to topple the government with a non-confidence vote.
The Conservatives are taking another step towards triggering an election, all opposition parties now saying they're ready to topple the government.
And Parliament was scheduled to return January 27th. So before even a full month of 2025 went by, we all could have been thrown into an election campaign if not for the fact that the Prime Minister has asked the Governor General to prorogue, to suspend Parliament until March 24th. And that request was granted.
And the House will now be prorogued until March 24th.
So this was basically a kind of hitting the pause button to give the Liberals time to have this leadership race.
It retains all the powers of a prime minister, which is considerable. But the time is short. It's running out pretty quick.
There are three really important components to proroguing Parliament, two of which are obvious, but the third is maybe the hardest to quantify. And I'll explain what I mean. So the clearest election-related consequence of suspending Parliament is that it becomes all but impossible for a general election to be called before the end of March. Because there's no way for opposition MPs to vote down the government if the House isn't even sitting. And I guess the flip side of that is that it becomes exceedingly likely for an election to be called the moment Parliament resumes, which could mean we all go to the polls sometime in late April or early to mid-May. The second thing to consider, Donald Trump's inauguration is in just a couple of weeks, January 20th. So Canada will have no effective way of passing new laws or introducing new budgets during the first several months of Trump's presidency. And in a world where the threat of tariffs and a trade war are a stated day one priority of the incoming American administration, the Canadian government can still govern, but without the legislative arm of Parliament, it is limited in what it can do.
Parliament can't pass new laws to deal with Trump, but I'll say it's not clear that legislation is really new laws or really what's needed right now when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump. It's sort of a campaign of persuasion, right? So that's something that involves the Prime Minister, and we do still have a Prime Minister in Justin Trudeau.
Cabinet can make decisions and will be making decisions. For example, the government is going to ready a list of counter-tariff measures if Mr. Trump was to go ahead with the 25% tariff on Canadian imports. We do not need Parliament in session to be able to do that.
But on this third point, let's just call a spade a spade. Proroguing Parliament is, in a very meaningful way, a self-interested play that helps the Liberals. I should say, to be fair, Trudeau did make the point that maybe there's value in a parliamentary cooling off period.
Removing me from the equation as the leader who will fight the next election for the Liberal Party should also decrease the level of polarization that we're seeing right now in the House and in Canadian politics.
But let's just be real. Prorogation buys the Liberals time. In the same way, it bought the Conservatives time in 2008 when Stephen Harper faced a leadership crisis and prorogued Parliament.
The dysfunction in Parliament, not great, but surely the prospect of facing an election that was the last thing they want is the bigger motivating factor for the Liberals here.
And in today's version of the story, it's valuable time not just to find a new leader, but to figure out how to find a new leader. The Liberal Constitution doesn't explicitly say how long a leadership race must be, but it does require the race to be at least 3 months long. As it stands, they now have less than 3 months to choose a new leader, or else face the possibility of being catapulted into an election campaign with no real captain at the wheel. So the party's executive will have to decide how to find the best leader fast and in a way that feels fair to all involved.
You want to have a very competitive field of candidates, so at least Canadians can judge people, and the Liberal Party can judge who they think would be most qualified to take on Mr. Poilievre.
We don't know exactly how long the list will be, but I think there are a lot of people thinking about it.
And that brings us to the biggest question of all. Who replaces Justin Trudeau?
It has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
There will be lots of time to talk about contenders. There's the longtime finance minister and deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland. There's the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, Mark Carney. There's Dominic LeBlanc, Anita Anand, Mélanie Joly, François-Philippe Champagne, Sean Fraser, even former BC Premier Christy Clark. All names that have been thrown out there as potentially in the running.
The stakes are really high, and it feels like it's going to be a real pressure cooker.
But what makes this different from any other federal leadership race ever that I can remember is how the knives are out, not just during a prime minister's term, but how the prime minister's party itself is simultaneously tiptoeing the incredibly thin ice of a minority government, whose main opponents have all sworn to topple at the earliest possible moment, and at a time when the Liberal Party has almost never looked weaker. Because whoever takes over the leadership may not even be fighting to win the next election. They might be fighting for second or even third place.